share again.
There we go. Nope. Aha, there we go.
I don't see you.
I'm gonna start my video. There we go. Okay, that should be better now. Got it?
Okay, should we resume?
Yeah.
Okay, can you guys hear me well, hopefully?
Yes.
Okay, so what we're going to do today as a part of a bigger umbrella study, and it's basically a layered approach to define where we are for the audience. When we give an argument, we assume that we move from one level to the other, and they are harder at the bottom and gets easier near the top. So you can see that the current one here in this, it's in the form of levels. Let me just turn off my phone. So let's get into level one just to give you an idea what's in it. So what we're going to talk to do today is actually in these two squares here. But there is a lot of work that is done in the work of science and philosophy as well. So level one basically deals with the idea of not mentioning religion, not mentioning the church, giving an argument for the presence of faith, or for the presence of how life started, without saying like God started it, but actually giving an argument. If evolution has started life, where is the scientific challenge to this statement? All scientific, like in the field of science, for example, the evolution and cosmology are two big topics that I spent several hours on. This is part of a class I do over 16 weeks. That to refute if evolution cannot start life, and the Big Bang had preconditions for it, and these are heavily scientific arguments, not religious, not from the Bible, not based on faith. So level one is all how to give an argument from science applied to evolution and cosmology. Why these two? Why these two specifically? Because if life started by itself and evolution is what's behind everything, then evolution can start life. And this statement has to be discussed on a scientific level. And if the Big Bang, if the universe self-nucleated, then the Big Bang can occur by itself. So these two are very healthy lectures, scientific. It discusses both the history of biology and molecular biology in evolution, and coupled with it, information theory, believe it or not, and that's basically Claude Shannon theory in 1948. How do you measure digital information as we find it now in the molecular biology and the DNA, and how does that preclude the statement, or at the very least gives very strong challenges to the assertion that evolution can start life. And the same thing here, cosmology has a bit of quantum mechanics in it, because it states the conditions for what is called quantum tunneling, where vacuum can become matter. There is a very elegant theory in quantum mechanics that states that under the certain conditions, and these conditions are described in the lecture, then vacuum can become something, but the conditions have to exist before this happens. And there's several scientists that don't explain, except that the condition has to happen, and they preclude that if you discuss these questions, you go into theology or philosophy, and that's not science, so they remove it. So there's a certain trick that happens in several scientists that they dodge the question. Our talk is not about this, but I just want to let you know that that's available in a very, very healthy way, not just reading books and talking about it. This is the work of years to get into very concrete scientific work in these two areas. And these two areas are very important because if I can challenge, and here is the approach, if I can challenge that evolution starts life on a scientific basis, and if I can challenge also that the universe self-nucleated on a very scientific basis, then if these two statements are challengeable, then it leaves room for the question, how did life start? And how did the universe nucleated? Because we refuted scientifically, not religiously. The Bible is Bible, God, Jesus Christ, Holy Spirit, Church. All of these terms are not usable, and that's why I divided into an architecture basically that level one is the level where there is no terms that are discussed that have any religious intonation. So I will not get into these now because our discussion today is logic. The logic, when we see a certain movement, I'm going to call it from now on a movement. And this movement, it got called later Christianity. It started by 12 people. And these 12 people claim that there is a certain person called Jesus is God or is divine. So we'll see this can hold water or not on logic, just a mere logic. This is where we'll get into detail, but just to let you know what is in these levels. And philosophy also angles of the meaning of life, the value of life, the purpose of life if God doesn't exist. These are different pieces of puzzle that fit together when you discuss with some person bare bone discussion where you can give an argument, not indoctrination, an argument, like as if you're presenting a paper in a conference or in a journal, you present an argument. And with science, I forgot to mention, you have data. What happens in science, they have data and there is an assertion that happens from the data. And if this assertion is philosophical, then the faith can come in and challenge it. The assertion that's philosophical that happens in science is basically based on the available data. There is no creator. There is no one that's behind life or the universe. That's a philosophical assertion, by the way. It's called philosophy of science field has to deal with this, not science. Science is about data, but once you make this conclusion, you get into philosophy. So this is where people like us of philosophy jump in to debate it, but we don't debate it using faith. We debate it using your data. I can deal with it because the scientific methodology is data, hypothesis, observation, hypothesis, experimentation, conclusion. So the observation of data created a hypothesis that became a conclusion. The experimentation part could be used to challenge your data, make another conclusion from your data, or challenge the conclusion you made from your data. So challenge the data itself, challenge the conclusion you made out of the data, or offer another conclusion from the same data, all the three together. This is a scientific approach, and that's what I use in these two. Nothing related to any type of philosophical or religious language. Just to know that this is level one. It's where most of the effort is done. If I conclude that there is a hypothesis because life cannot self-start and the cosmology, the universe cannot self-nucleate, there could be someone who can bootstrap it. And then when we'll discuss logic today, we'll discuss, is this movement man-made or it has some tenets in it? It has validity in it. Just to give you the full architecture, and we'll get back into level one, I just want to give you the big picture that we're not discussing this discussion today as just a separate topic. It's part of a body of work, and that body of work is layered in this layer. So the conclusion from level one, there is enough argument to show that there is someone behind the universe, and that this man, Jesus, because we'll show today, that's what we're going to discuss today, has very anomalous thing about him and about his movement. And we'll do this not from the Bible. That's why I said the discussion today is the argument to give to a listener, and the listener can stab at this argument. And I want you to stab it when I make it. This is actually, that's why I like to give to college students because it's as if presenting a paper and the audience can discuss your assertions. So if this is true in level 1, then which religion is the right one? Who captures that one who's outside the universe and outside of life that could start them? Why start them? That's something that's not to be discussed now. This comes with level 3 because there's a reason that this life started and the universe started. So which religion captures this? And that's called the worldview approach. I will not get into them just to get into the topic tonight. In the class I actually give a training on how to compare this worldview that the Bible offers compared to the worldview that Mormonism offers. That's just as a case study because the course would not be long enough to discuss. We can do with Hinduism, Buddhism, whatever you can name it. It's the same style will apply. If Christianity is the best worldview and captures a creator, which Christianity? Apostolic Christianity or non-apostolic Christianity? So I get here into how can you logically prove that the communion must be the body and blood of Christ? And that's in fact a book by itself because I found it very, very useful in catechism for Protestants. And it had by God's grace quite a bit of success because from the Bible only, not church history, you can explain why the communion has to be real, body and blood of Christ. And it covers from the creation. And I call it the problem solution approach, and it's very, very logical, and it helps even for Copts. It's very, very helpful that we don't take the communion because our history has it, but we'll take communion. Now we can use the Bible here because now I have covered the previous 2 levels. And then this is what we do in the church all the time, level 4, which is getting deeper in the apostolic faith, which is what you're all familiar with. Just wanted to let you know that we can have whatever discussions you want. You live in a very nice field in Berkeley, very research oriented. I love this about schools. I myself came out from a research environment, so I really appreciate the minds that think, and they become, as I said, the Logos, God the Logos, the Son, was incarnate and became Jesus Christ, by whom everything was created, visible and invisible. He gives us a faith. He cannot be requiring our mind to be turned off to believe in that faith. And that's where I would be very, very happy if anybody would like to work on any topic in level 1, and we can give a taste from it. So we're going to get into logical today, and it's actually going to be these 3 angles, but I will switch to a specific PowerPoint for it because it is in a separate PowerPoint. So let's switch to this one. Window. Can you guys hear me, or I lost you?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. So I called it that in our daily life, in our even as not as doubting God's presence, we cannot pray or go to the church without if we have any doubt about our faith. So with several lovely youth that they said, I am having a faith because I grew up in it, I would just tell them, okay, let's wipe everything clean. Let's do it logically, not because you were born into a Coptic family. So that would added the material for the logical part in level 1. As I said, level 1 is the toughest one, but it's the most pleasurable because you have to think hard on how to offer an argument. And this is what I will do with you today. And I want you to ask about it, and we'll discuss it. And I would love to hear any challenges to it. So I called it, is Christianity man-made? A logical approach to the answer. As I said, the whole attraction I had for apologetics is because one cannot get deeper in their faith unless they have no doubts about the faith. Apologetics is not a mental approach to religion. Otherwise, one will become just an intellect. And it is mandatory. It is mandatory by God through the words of St. Peter, the apostle, the disciple, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect, not with fighting. So there are three mandates in this verse. In your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Two, always be ready to give an apologia. This is where the Greek word answer or defense is apologia, where the term apologetics came from. To everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and with respect. So these are the four levels. Is there God? History and science and logic and philosophy. If we conclude from it the presence of a designer, we'll get into in which belief is this God or designer after we have established that the presence of life by initiation on its own, and the same thing with matter, is scientifically, to say the least and mildly, is a major conclusion of a hypothesis, and the data can actually loudly propose another hypothesis, which is the initiation from another source. And that's very, very clear when we discuss the evolution and cosmology, but it's not tonight's topic. In which belief, after discussing with other faiths, if it's in the Christian faith, then which Christianity, apostolic or non-apostolic, and we'll conclude from it the apostolic, which crystallizes itself into what we practice, as we both know Jesus Christ. Is he the one who have in communion, or we have a symbol of him in communion? And why communion? Because I will prove that communion is the end of salvation. The cross and the resurrection are the salvation of the human nature, but you don't receive that salvation unless certain things happen to you by the grace of God, ending into you having communion. And then the depths into the apostolic faith, which you are familiar with in the church. The logical approach will have three parts, and I think we can continue this if we don't finish tonight. I think it will be very tough to do it in one night, but it will be three parts. And they are linked. And this is all, by the way, is personal invention of the argument over the years. And that's why I love very much to pitch it to college students and get all the challenges back. Number one, Christianity killers. Odds against the new movement. So what we're going to discuss in this, which is tonight, things that, in fact, any one of them would have killed that movement. And it's not one thing, it's multiple things. So how did that movement survive? And we're not going to stop there, but we're going to show other movements that you're not even aware of their existence, that existed in parallel with this movement, and they died on their own. They died on their own, because history will show non-Christian sources which will talk about this movement and what was happening in it. Non-Christian sources. If I have the time for it, I don't know how much I put into this section, but there is so many non-Christian sources. When we read them, you will infer things from the statements of the non-Christian sources that will support the argument that we're giving. So that's completely logical. So I'm going to say here that this Christianity or movement, let's call it movement from now on, is extremely improbable to succeed. That's the whole premise, is that I will lay out a case that this movement has no chance of succeeding beyond 3 or 4 years from its inception. It should die, and we'll see why it should die. So we'll discuss the odds against this movement, and the odds are extremely high, to the point that Christianity surviving is going to be, if we talk probability-wise, I like it more than possibility-wise, is going to be very, very low likelihood. And this is the case I am laying, but not alone. Parallel with this, the other movements, and they died on their own. They didn't succeed without any war, and that's why we got into history. There is the early history from non-Christian sources. There is nothing about any wars or any aggressive behavior from this movement to the other people who claimed another movement. And that's why we'll talk about how non-Christian sources describe the movement from outside. So these are three pivots that stool rests on, not only one side. or not only one support. It's the three of them. But we'll take the first one, laying a probabilistic case that the odds against this movement, or the likelihood of its success in the middle of these challenges, or in the middle of these obstacles. I also ignored in my argument all the lovely teaching of the one who taught about the movement, the man Jesus Christ. Now, the man Jesus Christ exists or not, from the historical quotes from non-Christian sources, you will see that this is a fact. This man Jesus Christ existed, not from the Bible, from outside sources. If I have laid out the whole gamut of the architecture, there's multiple areas, not only in the logical, that prove his existence. One of them is a big study of the Shroud of Turin, and writing several papers on it. It happened that last year, I spent about 1 year with a school in Italy, just focusing on several subjects on the Shroud of Turin, and it required in every class we write a paper about it for passing it. So there is big part of it that this relic, this historical relic, it's a historical evidence, not in the form of paper, but in the form of a cloth, and it has a very anomalous characteristics about it, from the field of biology, from the field of imaging, and from the history of that cloth. And these three coupled together again lays a probabilistic approach to, does this cloth belong to the man that was described by these four documents? I'm not going to call them gospel, the four documents written by these four people, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I will not get into the shroud, but the shroud is an evidence. The shroud is an archaeological / scientific evidence, because it's an archaeological finding, but it has scientific data that were scientific research that were applied to it. The head of that work was, in fact, Dr. John Jackson in 1978 in Turin for 5 days with multiple disciplines applying research to it. And that's why it's called the Shroud of Turin. It's kept in Turin. Okay, so I'm ignoring the lovely teaching of this man Christ, who we'll see from non-Christian sources exists. I will ignore also all of the evidence of the prophecies to be fulfilled, because I will be using the Bible then, to be fulfilled to this person specifically. And this is a conditional probability. You guys go to Berkeley, so you're familiar with the conditional probability or Bayes' theorem of probability when it's conditioned upon the event that happened before it. It's not mutually exclusive events. They are laid where probability of B provided that A happened. You start having terms in the denominator that lowers the probability very, very quickly. So the first odd, or the first anomaly, I will call them now the odds against the movement. The message itself is foolish. God became man. Well, we know why, but that's very odd. How can God become man? And then if you accept this, then he got killed by crucifixion. That's even a fairy tale. And then he rose from the dead. And if you tell to somebody, please, where is that God who rose from the dead? And you tell him he ascended to heaven. Do you see how illogical that statement is? God became human is illogical. That God died is more illogical. That God who died resurrected, well, show him to me. And then I tell him he ascended, he's not here. That's then the conversation will not last far beyond this statement that he ascended to heaven. So the first odd against this movement is what the movement preaches in itself. Remember, take this as a footnote, because in other faiths like Buddhism or Judaism, which could be persecuted, there is no dogma you have to believe in to join it. It has much more traction than this. This is the gate to join this movement. And the gate to join this movement is ludicrous, is laughable. So to join the group that preaches this, you have to believe it. If you don't believe it, okay, don't join. Any other morality or Far East religions, there is no dogma you have to believe in to join. There is philosophical statements dealing with tribulation, dealing with death, but there is not a certain dogma to join. Everybody is welcomed. This movement has a gate, has a very tough gate you have to pass through. So put in your mind that it is very difficult to believe in it. It is very difficult to join it. So from the beginning, this won't get any traction. And the message itself is not making any sense. So if you imagine a conversation, where is Christ? Person A asking, person B would say, he ascended, so you just have to believe me. I saw him. You just have to believe me. In fact, one of the followers of Christ, his name is Paul, he calls it the foolishness of the gospel. Our gospel is just stupid. The message that's mentioned is just ludicrous, unbelievable, can't make any sense. So we have no chance to succeed because of what it says itself. The message itself is foolishness. It will not pass any logical mind. This is basically playing on the same conversation. Why should I believe it? Person B, the resurrection. People saw him after he resurrected. Those who saw him behave differently. That is part of that now. Behave differently, but it's not elevating them in the society. What is the difference in the behavior? All of a sudden, the importance of life diminished. And I will quote this from non-Christian sources that made fun of this group. Rightfully so, they call them, they don't make any sense. Actually, Luciano specifically, a satirist in the 2nd century, his writings are so important, how he ridicules the people who join this crazy group and what crazy things they believe in and what their lawgiver says. But from what he's writing, it will show us how this early group behaved. It will show us they have a leader. It will show us how that leader died. So this is what the training that will happen, how to read non-Christian sources that will support your argument. So the argument here is that these people, the way they believe, they deal with life, all of a sudden it became not important for them. They are crazy. They believe they have another life, but that's their behavior. Second thing, they are loving. They never preached a war. They never preached a fighting. We're going to talk about 3 things in the society that they promoted: staying in marriage, paying taxes, and respecting the employment system of the Roman Empire. Because if somebody says that they were a threat to the empire, what threat? We're going to show this with evidence. They have contempt for life. They are full of love to everybody. They have contempt for worldly possession. They were called actually stupid because of this. Lucianus will call them, actually in his writings, he says it's very, very easy to take their belongings. They are so gullible, and if you take it, they will not come after you to take them back. The contempt of death, as they love those who tortured them. That is a documented behavior of these people of the movement. So person B will tell person A, look at their behavior. There must be another life because of their behavior. Well, it is not enough evidence, but the evidence is the people who join this movement, and they cannot join unless they confess the resurrection, which is the first odd. It's very hard to join them. It's very, very far-fetched thought, but they behave differently than the rest of the world. That's a fact, documented by the people who will make fun of that behavior, not from Christian sources. Odd number 2, if you want to spread a message that is that foolish and you want it to succeed, there's actually 3 ways to spread the message. 1, secretly with deceit, that people will gain profit out of it. Their eternity will be like this. There is financial profit that will come if you join. For example, the other faith leaders, they benefited very, very much financially from starting a faith. Or you can start it with power and compulsion. Force the people who don't believe in it, you kill them. You just tell them, either you believe or I'll kill you. That's a method of spreading a religion. And we have, in fact, an example of this. And if you understand Arabic and you watch YouTube videos, you'll find so many statements that Islam, the clerics are very, very proud. It grew by force. Yeah, al-ghazawat, it's called invasions. That's a way to spread a faith, with power and compulsion. You threat. If they don't join because you're the right one and you have to save them, you kill them. That's a way to spread a message. Or openly with conviction and tolerating what happens to you when you do it. These are three methods to spread any message that you know you have it and the others don't. That's odd number two. And of course, the third choice is what chosen. There's no evidence of any power. There's no evidence of any compulsion. There is no evidence of any promising anything on earth to fool people to join you. In fact, the message itself says that you're going to lose everything. It promotes losing everything for joining because you're imitating the leader. And that's why it's impossible to join it. You lose. And in fact, that's documented in Hebrews chapter 10, but I will not read it for the sake of time. But Hebrews chapter 10 shows that those who joined this movement in Jerusalem, their belongings were plundered and they suffered to the point that they contemplated leaving Christianity and going back to Judaism. And in fact, St. Paul told them, don't do this. And that's one of the reasons of writing Hebrews. But that's not, I'm not using this as an evidence, just to tell you that people who left, who joined this faith, nobody gained anything from doing it. So that's the third method of joining. So the obstacles to spread the message openly, which is what happened, there is no political correctness where you can freely speak of this Christ. If you do it, you will be persecuted. Here is the part, who will persecute you? Who will persecute you? The Jews, they have a religion. They will persecute you, and they did. In fact, a lot of the stoning of Stephen, lots of evidence shows that the Jews did every effort to this movement that started in Jerusalem. So there is a religious opponent, there's an intellectual opponent. When you speak about this God who became a human, there is very mature Greek teaching that will laugh at you. And there's an evidence of that happened to St. Paul in Athens. They laughed at him and they left. And another fierce one, the political opponents are the Roman Empire. So just so far from two only, you're spreading a foolish message. It's religious, so there's the religious opponents. Think logically, it doesn't make sense. The Greeks' philosophy is filling the whole world. That's actually, in fact, why they invaded the world, to spread their philosophy. Third, you're going to have a very fierce empire that not just will kill you, will torture you before killing you. This is the environment. This is the environment. In this non-army-based, non-power-based people, men and women, are preaching this message. And the punishment is either severe torture, either by the Jews, maybe the Greeks didn't do this, but the Jews stoning because of blasphemy, or the Romans, and we'll get into the Roman aspect in detail, because that is healthy enough to discuss. Examples of invented religions at that time. There is invented religions. In fact, there is two movements that started, and they are quoted in Acts chapter 5, but I will quote them here from Josephus, the Jewish historian. And this is the reference for it in the Antiquities of the Jews, book 20, chapter 5. This is what he says. For before these days rose up Theudas, boasting himself to be somebody to whom a number of men, about 400, joined themselves, who was slain, and all as many as obeyed him were scattered and brought to nothing. After this rose up Judas of Galilee in the days of taxing, and drew away much people after him. He also perished, and all, even as many as obeyed him, were dispersed. So there is leaders that started movements then, and the Roman Empire, for one reason or the other, squashed it completely. And having 400 following him is not a small number. We know historically, this movement started by 120, which is a very small number, as we'll get into the other odds. And this is, in fact, exactly what Gamaliel's advice in Acts 5, that he tells that the Sanhedrin, I'm going to read it just to show that there is some among the Jews that just said, it will die on its own. Just leave it alone. It will die. We have these examples. And now I say to you, refrain from these men and let them alone, for if this counsel or this work be of men, it will come to nothing. But if it be of God, because he's Jewish, Gamaliel, yet you cannot overthrow it, lest haply, maybe, ye be found even to fight against God. And to him they agreed, and when they had called the apostles and beaten them, so they didn't agree and let them go. They agreed, but they still, you know what, we might as well, since we have them, let's beat them up. they commanded that they should not speak in the name of Jesus, and they let them go. And they departed from the presence of the council, rejoicing that they were counted worthy to suffer shame for his name, and daily in the temple, in every house, they ceased not to teach and preach Jesus Christ. I'm not putting this as an evidence. I said this is a biblical passage, but it shows the mind of thinking of the Jews and their actions towards these believers. The wise among them just said, we had two leavers, they went to nothing. Leave them. And before this, in fact, Gamaliel mentions Thudas and Judas. He mentions them by name, the same names that Josephus mentioned. Josephus, the historian, Jewish historian. Odd number 3. The number of people to start this movement is not an army. It's actually very few number. 82, which is just adding the 70 to the 12. If we add St. Paul, that will be 83, plus some believers, women also included. Remember, they speak openly. They don't use any power. There's no deceit or plot to raise money or to make money. Actually, in fact, you're going to lose if you join us. You have nothing to gain. Except we saw him risen. He is risen. That's what they say. And if you don't believe this, you can't be part of it. I'm just summarizing as we're stacking up the odds that we're building up a case with awesome barriers. So why was it hard that these 82 leaders would be contained by the Jews or the Romans and killed? And end of story. It's just very easy to contain them. And yet they just, in Jerusalem, just gather them, stone them, and we're done. How come they survive without any weapons except their speech and loving actions? And how come when some of them were murdered, the others did not run away and get weaker, or at least decided to use swords and fight back? From the early history that we will read from non-Christian sources, nothing is written that they had to squash this movement because it had any violent or threat or army or anything. That's why part 3 about the history is very pivotal for this, as an outsider looks. This is an evidence from one of their leaders that says, what is the type of teaching they call for as a behavior? But as he which has called you is holy, so you be holy in every conduct. To behave holy in the Roman Empire environment is not something that's easy for someone to give up. Because it is written, be you holy, for I am holy. Another believer who used to be Jewish and converted to this faith, actually he used to be a fierce persecutor, but that's according to the Bible. So I'll just say one of their teachers describes what his condition before and after joining this group. So he says, circumcised the 8th day. Oh, so he's a Jewish. There is actually evidence of the Jewish existence, of course. Of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of the Hebrews, as touching the law, a Pharisee. Why is saying Hebrew of the Hebrews? Because there's another parallel path, which is the Edomites, the children of Esau. The Hebrews are the children of Jacob. Just a footnote to define why he says a Hebrew of the Hebrews, not a Hebrew just of the Edomites, but from the main stock of Israel. That's why he says from the stock of Israel, from Jacob, not from the Edomites, which are from Esau. Concerning zeal, persecuting the church, touching the righteousness which is in the law. As a Jewish person, I'm blameless. I did everything in the law, the rituals of the law. But what things were gained to me, those I counted loss for Christ. I decided to leave all of this heritage, and there is all of this established faith, and I joined this group. Yet doubtless I count all things but loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and do count them but rubbish, that I may win Christ. That is an evidence of what happens to a person when he joins this group and what he promotes. He actually says everything else is garbage. I am happy to know just this leader, Christ, which will show that he existed from non-Christian sources. Another description of what happened to what his life looks like. Of the Jews, 5 times received I 40 stripes minus 1. This is according to the Mishnah. According to the law, the Jewish flogging is 39. There is certain, actually, believe it or not, some psalm passages that are said with it. The Romans don't have a limit on this. So the flogging of this man Christ, as an evidence from the relic of the shroud, is not 40. This is unlimited till the person could die from flogging. But I will not talk much about this so that we can continue the main thought here. Thrice was I beaten with rods. Once was I stoned. Thrice I suffered shipwreck. A night and a day I have been in the deep. In journeys often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils by my own countrymen, in perils by the heathen, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and painfulness, in watchings often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness, besides those things that are without, that which comes upon me daily, the care of all the churches. This is the description of the lifestyle of one of the leaders of this movement. They're not comfortable. They're not having a congregation under them where they can rule over it and they live this happy life. No, that's a description of what is one of their popes, in fact. Odd number 4, the 82 popes that started it, in fact, were martyred. If you kill all the leaders that early on with that short of a time, the congregation would be afraid, and it's very, very hard to sustain it. So all of a sudden, 82 leaders, they go to the different parts of the world and they are all executed. And we have evidence of this. One of them is Mark. One of the leaders that came to Egypt is Mark, one of the 70. So what do the people see in this public torture that ends with death of the leaders and of the believers that make them want to follow what these people believe in? So I am saying here, there is so much high odds for any person to just entertain joining this movement. It has no chance to catch any number. Just imagine you're trying to build a club on campus and the amount of work you have to do to recruit people to this club. What are the benefits they get out of joining? What are the it helps in jobs, whatever. There's some perks that you get, at least understanding your material better at school, whatever it is. But there is some perks to join a group. There is some worldly elevation to join a group. This group, if you join them, you are at the question of death, not just suffering in your life. The leaders are dead. The leaders are executed. So there's an evidence that even the top people, their position doesn't protect them. In fact, they are the ones that are hunted first. Here is the very first tidbit of a historical account. Josephus, a Jewish historian, mentions about the killing of Saint James, removing the word Saint James, who was in fact, he became the first bishop of Jerusalem. This is in book 20, chapter 9. Ananus assembled a Sanhedrin of judges and brought before them the brother of Jesus. So that's why the brother, we can talk about the genealogy and who are the brothers of Jesus. That's not the topic tonight, but somebody who's their follower called the brother of Jesus, and some others or some of his companions. And when he had formed Ananus an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. So there's a very, very important question here. How come this movement grows? It is counterintuitive. They have no riches. They are tortured. They preach love and peace and do not fight back. God whom they are preaching does not come and save them. Like shown evidence that what you're doing is has a purpose and save them from, they end up dying. Although they are dying for him, why would you join? There's no person in the right mind, according to the logical evidence, who join this group at all. Try to start a club on campus and see the effort you try to do in order to recruit people to the club. Odd number 5. That's a very strong odd. You have a whole empire for 300 years trying to get rid of this new sect. The reason for this, they consider them atheists because they are preaching a God, Jesus being a God, and they have their own gods. And in fact, in order to win wars, we have to take our gods with us. So anybody who believes in this faith in the army, before they come with us into war, or when they start to get into fighting for the empire, they have to offer incense to our gods. When they refuse, then we start threatening them with death. And we have examples of this, but I'm not going to quote anything from the church history. I'm laying here a logical case called the odds against the movement. The stacked events, or the stacked status, when you stack them up with a Bayesian probability, that to overcome all of these, the probability of the success of this movement provided this, and provided this, and provided this, and provided this, and these are all stacked together. Even if you treat them mutually exclusive, you're going to come up with a very, very, very low number for the probability of the success. So let's get to this one. 300 years doing every effort to get rid of this new sect. For the Roman Empire, worshipping idols is not optional. It is part of serving the country. It is part of serving in the army to defend the empire, because they consider if you don't honor their gods, you are an atheist, you're threatening the peace of the empire in terms of the faith, the new faith that you have. Of course, Christians believing in God, whatever that's right or wrong, whatever that faith is correct or not, they say we will not offer incense because our God is the only God. We cannot offer to another one. Our dogma, our circle of faith does not allow this. So the result is, as we'll see from historical non-Christian sources, the result is severe, severe persecution. But there might be an argument by atheists, I say this not in a derogatory term, it's with full respect. Atheist, somebody who doesn't believe in the existence of God, and I'm trying to promote there is logical argument for this movement not growing on its own. What I'm trying to do here is my case. Give me a counter argument, or give me an explanation. What could I have missed that made it grow on its own among these odds? That's what I'm saying here. The hearer, when he hears my case, they have to come up with a statement that says, no, besides all of these odds, it could have succeeded because, and they have to give a very, very clear explanation. And that's exactly the approach I use with apologetic. I'm not indoctrinating. I am giving a case, and the hearer has to poke holes at that case. So the odd number 5 here, somebody says, oh, Christianity posed a threat to the homogeneity of the empire, or to the solid cohesion of the empire. What would damage an empire? Because that would be an argument to show that the persecution of Christianity by the Roman Empire was not because of faith, it was because they were a threat. So what would threaten an empire? What threatened an empire is, what all what they preach is purity, but I want to get into this part. I want to get to what threatens the empire. Number 1, you tell the slaves to revolt against their masters. That would threaten the employment system of the empire. Number 2, you tell the Christians not to pay taxes to an atheist ruling. Number 3, you tell every wife who believes divorce your husband, or every husband who believes divorce your wife. So you would threaten the employment fabric, you would threaten the economical stability, or you would threaten the family stability. Well, let's see what the teachings are according to this faith. One of the leaders writes in Romans 13, by the way, the emperor at that time could have been Nero already. But let's what he says about respecting the leader. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. He didn't mention any faith-related issue. So then you have to obey the emperor, you have to respect the laws, and also you have to pay taxes. Then give to all their dues. To the one due tax, the tax. To the one due tribute, the tribute, or customs. To the one due fear, the fear. To the one due honor, the honor. That's related to, they didn't cause any threat to the economical stability of the empire. They were paying taxes, they were paying customs, even if the rulers is actually killing them, persecuting them. St. Paul was beheaded by that ruler who's saying he's ordained by God for, he mentions later in Romans 13 that that ruler is put to punish the people who break the law. So he's killing Christians, but we have to obey him in terms of civil duty. Women and men in a family. And the woman which has husband that does not believe, and if he be pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave him. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Else were your children unclean, but now they are holy. But if the unbelieving partner wants to depart, let him/her depart. Yes, you cannot say, I will denounce Christ because I want to keep my marriage. No, that is again, Christ is above all. So he's saying, if the unbelieving wants to leave, in that case, you're not tied to stop from leaving. But you are leaving if he's accepting that you're Christian. You are not living in sin. You are not living in unholiness. In fact, you are living in holiness. That applies when the Christianity comes on a people of another faith that are married already. Like if a family, Islamic family, for example, and one of them believes in Islam and in Christianity, the church doesn't say leave your husband. If the husband is still Muslim and living with you and accepting this, yeah, keep the marriage. Here is the slaves, servants. Be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in singleness of your heart, as unto Christ, not with eye service as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with good will, doing service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatsoever good thing any man does, the same shall he receive of the Lord, whether he be bond or free. If the master is a Christian, this can apply to him. If not, of course, this will not apply to them at all. And you, O masters, do the same things unto them, forbearing, threatening, knowing that your master also is in heaven, neither is there respect of persons with him. So the teaching of these leaders to the slaves, still be honest with your master and you have to serve him. So marriage is kept, economic stability is kept, and marriages, and I said the economic stability and the employment stability is kept. So we see now that the new movement respected the full laws of the empire, the full fabric of the empire. They are truly model citizen, economical fabric, the customs and the taxes they paid it, family fabric, marriage and social cohesion, master-slave fabric, the employment and the social fabric of the society. So the presence of Christianity did not pose any civic threat to the empire. So if somebody argues that they were persecuted for another reason, no. The one reason is what this movement believed in. For how long? 300 years. The full empire, with its full power disposed at it, could not get rid of what started and was always peaceful and was always loving by just 120 persons. So what is expected? Given the following: Christ is not here, he ascended. That's the dogma. Christians have no army to fight back. They are just people. They are ridiculed all the time due to their beliefs and the way of pure living. So the first Roman emperor will have no problem to kill them all. That is sayonara, bye-bye to Christianity. It cannot continue. That is what was expected. That's what logic says. Now we have 10 Roman emperors over 300 years trying to do that by killing Christians after torturing them to make them example. If you dare to join, what will happen to you? And yet this mighty empire was not able to get rid of Christianity. Moreover, in fact, in 312, it was accepted not to be a crime to be a Christian in the Roman Empire. That's the Edict of Milan by Emperor Constantine. So it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense that this movement succeeds. Here are the Roman emperors quickly, and there's enough history in them. Persecution under Nero, persecution under Domitian. This is actually, in fact, the interval that's saying that Paul and Peter were beheaded and also crucified upside down. It doesn't matter, it's not important, but this is the history, what it did to this movement. Persecution under Domitian, persecution under Trajan, persecution under Marcus Aurelius, persecution under Septimus Severus, that are the associated dates with them. Very severe one under Decius. Christians are actively sought out by requiring a public service, could buy certificates or libelly. If they offer incense to idols, they have a certificate that they show I did offer the incense, and they are not asked anymore. If they are asked anymore, they can show the certificate and they are exempt from offering incense because they have done it already. And the history of who got persecuted and killed under these emperors, this is where the Christian sources are. Persecution under Valerian, persecution under Maximinus the Thracian, persecution under Aurelian, and the severe persecution under Diocletian. This is what's called the Great Persecution. All of these are mentioned here. I just want to mention Tacitus here. Tacitus is the major Roman historian. He in fact says in the time of Nero, because Nero burned Rome. So Tacitus is writing about the burning of Rome. He's describing what happens to these people, the Christians, not that he's siding with them, but because it is not right to blame them for the burning of Rome. It's Nero that did it. But this is an example of non-Christian source, and see what it can tell us about evidence of the presence of Christianity. Besides being put to death, they, the Christians, were made to serve as objects of amusement. For it was felt that they were being destroyed not for the public good, but to satisfy the cruelty of an individual. So the people even started to commiserate with them because what he did to them was inhuman. So we'll discuss Tacitus later on in detail when we read non-Christian passages of Tacitus and Septimus and non-Christian writings that will tell us what this movement was doing. Okay, I will skip through the Roman Empire. This is actually in detail of what every emperor did to the Christians for 300 years. And Diocletian being the worst is called actually the Great Persecution. Justin Martyr, fix this now. Justin Martyr is a convert, a philosopher convert to Christianity. And he wrote what is called two apologias, one to the emperor and one to a Jewish person debating with him called Trypho. And he's describing this: though beheaded and crucified and thrown to wild beasts and chains and fire and all kinds of torture, we do not give up our confession. He was a Greek philosopher, not even a Jewish background. He believed in Christianity. We'll not mention the life story of Justin Martyr. And then he wrote to the emperor a defense. Why are we being killed? What crime did we do? And he's describing, we know about so many things in early Christianity from the writing of this convert. But more such things happened, the more do others in larger numbers became faithful. That is the part that's, we don't know how to explain. Why was this is in front of the people? Why do they join it? And that's somebody who's debating the success of the movement has to explain what logical reason would make anybody in the right mind join this. I mean, seeing mothers with their kids beheaded. Philip Schaff writes about this, is a recent historian. No other religion could have stood for so long a period the combined opposition of Jewish bigotry, Greek philosophy, and Roman policy and power. No other could have triumphed at last over so many foes by purely moral and spiritual force without calling any carnal weapons to its aid. Don't discuss cults. Now, cults grew in the United States. Very favorable, it's freedom of religion. Nobody will persecute you when you start whatever religion that claims anything. It is different completely than the environment in this movement has done. Testimony of the faith by Josephus himself. Now there was about this time Jesus. So here is a Jewish historian, mentions there is a person called Jesus. A wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, or he was a doer of wonderful works. That's a Jewish testimony for what the behavior of this man and his followers were doing. A teacher of such men as received the truth with pleasure. He drew to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles, he was the Christ. Not believing that Jesus Christ is Christ, but in fact, he was called the Anointed. The word Christ means he was called the Anointed. So what I'm hoping from here to show very clearly, history shows that there is a man called Jesus existed, and he had followers, and the behavior of these followers was impeccable. If it's lawful to call him a man from the way he behaved. Again, continuing Josephus, and when Pilate, that name existed. There is a person called Pilate, and he is in history. At the suggestion of the principal men among us, so he says that the Jews are the ones who pushed Pilate, had condemned him to the cross. There is now the way he died. Those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again the third day. You don't want to believe this in the writing of Josephus? Strike it out. What I'm after here is laying the foundation of the odds against this movement succeeding, and the evidence that the man who started it has a presence in history. If somebody says Jesus doesn't exist, this is completely fairy tale. Even people who challenge Christianity, they say this is the mythicist. He does exist, but he's not God. And the tribe of the Christian. Anybody saying something?
Is it okay if we can give you like just 10 more minutes? Because some people have like.
Sure. I'm actually getting to laying the 6 of them, and we'll end there. So I'm getting to the end of it in less than 10 minutes. So when we read things in writings in history, especially non-Christian, so we look for things that we're familiar with that are documented by someone who's not Christian. So this is not in our faith, this is not in our creed, this is in fact people who had existed, and he's the one who authorized the crucifixion of Christ on a cross. Now, this is about St. John the Baptist. Also Josephus is mentioning that there is somebody called John, and Herod killed him, and so on. I will leave this in order to get 6th odd. And this is in the next 10 minutes, I will do the 6th odd, and I will lay down the 6 together in one page to just show the odds against this movement. Called the scoffers. I was reading in 2nd Epistle of St. Peter, this verse, as we're doing it in our Bible study, knowing this first, that the scoffers will come in the last days, walking according to their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? Yeah, that's a very big challenge. You guys are saying he's coming again. He's not coming. We haven't seen any evidence of this. So that's another challenge. What is being preached, that he's coming again, doesn't happen. That makes it even, what we said as the fairy tale, which is odd number 1, makes it even more substantiated that he doesn't exist, he's not coming, and just this is all a fairy tale. So Christ hasn't come yet, hence all these apostles are delusional. Christ non-coming in the 1st century even gives more reason for not believing in it. Again, the inception, as can evolution start life? Can the universe self-nucleate? Can this movement in its inception, in its the very beginning, succeed? Don't think of it now and the churches and the Roman Empire believing in it, and the strength of the church, especially in the West. And no, that's not the case at all. We're talking here, its inception. It should have died very early in the 1st century. Here is the 6 odds. So the stacked challenges that would each one of them makes the probability, each one separately makes the probability of the success of the movement extremely improbable. First of all, the movement message itself is ludicrous. God becomes a man and somebody kills him on a cross, and then you claim he resurrected, and when I tell you, show him to me, you tell me he's not here. That's exactly the message, how it would sound to someone, logically. Number 2, there's no any promotion for somebody to join it. And the way you spread it, there's no army, there's no any power to make it grow. There's no enticement. It's just peaceful and with love. And whatever happens to you, happens to you. The number of people starting it is very small. It's 82. Without an army, without any support. And in fact, the 82 are facing a religion, very well-established religion, the Jews, a mentality that's called itself philosophy above the whole world, and that's why we have to civilize the world by invading it. That's the idea behind the philosophy of the Greek Empire. Is so much elevated than any other culture. Third, you are living in an empire that's very advanced in every system. It has an army, and it will not accept what you're talking about. And that's exactly what happened for 300 years. So very early on, with these three opponents, fierce opponents, these 82 would have no chance to go anywhere. These 82 that are the heads of it, they were all persecuted and killed. So that would scare the congregation. Number 5, the length of the persecution was not for 2 or 3 years, it was for 300 years. Number 6, claiming that he's coming again, which was actually make it a great proof that he existed and resurrected, didn't happen. And in fact, it will not happen. So the question that after laying this paper or argument, any example of an earlier religion that requires a dogma, because Hinduism and Buddhism does not require a dogma. Islam has a dogma, but it has a fierce way of spreading historically, and with YouTube sermons of clerics that says it is valid, very valid to spread it by the sword. Discussion of recent religions in the United States that are cults, that is not valid here because it is an environment completely not remotely related to the environment of this movement, how it started. So the question is, what are the odds of the success of this movement, or the likelihood and the probability of its success, with this stacked challenges or odds against it? And that is in fact part 1. And the next parts, if you want to have it, will be 2 and 3 together. And I will show you other movements that started and died on their own, and non-Christian sources that support the behavior of these people, that nobody can say, oh, the Bible quoting their teaching is wrong. They probably was very fierce. They were killing, and no, we're going to get people who lived with them and what they wrote about them. I hope that helps in shedding some logical approach on the movement. And thank you very much. I hope I stuck with my time to some extent.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions? Wait, I have a really quick question. Do we have a mathematical like a numerical value for the odds of this? I
actually started to make a document trying to estimate the probability of success if the message is like this, the probability of success if the wave spreading, and I can't, I just write numbers here of, but it would be an elegant exercise to try to come up with numbers. I was working on a numerical value, but didn't put it here because it's not mature yet.
It's like Bayes' theorem is like 1 over, and then like all of the odds of like your events that like happened, right? So like, can you like actually numerically like put any of these odds like into like a fraction?
I have to estimate like a probability. Sure, but you have to put numbers on if out of 100, if you tell them this message, how many people would believe, and that would be the probability. 2 out of 100, 0.02 would be the probability value. So you have to come up with hypothetical numbers. If the message is like this, out of 100 people, you talk to them about it, how many would believe? And then if they see what you will suffer if you believe, how many of them will stay? So you can come up with some numbers. That's just a mental exercise, but I started on it. And I haven't finished it actually, but I have it on the phone in one of the notes, just jotting out some numbers to try to come up with a number. Thank you for the question. So very quickly, this is the way that I like doing apologetics, not indoctrinating that Christianity must be right, because in fact, challenging the challenges to it. Oh, it's easy to succeed. Okay, let's see. And that's basically part 1. And we'll see what other religions at the same time, what they ended up being. and supporting the evidence of their behavior, not from verses in the Bible, but from people who are writing about them not favorably. But it will be good things to see the passage, and you will conclude, oh, we can conclude what he's saying here that supports this. Let's pray together, and thank you so much. Sorry to keep you late, but it's always a pleasure to talk to a college group, especially Berkeley. ربنا معاكم in all what you're doing. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. I mean, our dear loving Lord Jesus Christ, thank you, Lord, for the presence of your children. We ask you, Lord, that you bless their thoughts, make them stand firm in what has been delivered to us by the blood of martyrs. However, Lord, let us present it to other people in love and in their logic, going into the way of thinking and doing it in gentleness and love. So, intercession of Saint Mary, make us worthy to pray, thank you, our Father who art in heaven. Hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses. Pass against us, lead us not into temptation, but from the evil one. Jesus our Lord, for thine is the kingdom, power, and glory forever. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, one God. May the love of God the Father, the grace only begotten Son, Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, fellowship and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with you all. Go in peace, and the peace of God be with you all. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Have a good night.
You too, all of you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.